Hello, and welcome to Positive Psychology at Work. My name is May from Make It Work Workplace Wellness, and today I'd love to share with you the importance of taking a positive psychology approach to workplace well-being. The goal is to help everyone feel more connected, engaged, happy, and fulfilled in what they do. And the nature of this material makes it so that all of it is applicable to who we are in general in our lives, not just at work. So these goals are the same for the way you're being at work and the way you're being in life in general, and just who you are as a person. So let's dive into what positive psychology at work entails. And by the end of this quick little demo talk, you hopefully will have a better sense of how to feel more connected, engaged, happy, and fulfilled in what you do and who you are. So, first and foremost, a little definition of positive psychology. So, positive psychology is a scientific approach to studying human thoughts, feelings, and behavior with a focus on strengths instead of weaknesses. So, traditional psychology and counseling and therapy and research on mental health typically focused on mental illness and how to cope with illness and how to heal from illness and how to go from struggling to surviving. Positive psychology focuses on building the good in life instead of repairing the bad, and taking the lives of average people up to great instead of focusing solely on moving those who are struggling up to normal. So, positive psychology is all about helping people flourish, understand how they can, and supporting them in doing so. A focus on flourishing is really important when we talk about mental health and mental health in the workplace because it means we're not just talking about mental illness and whether or not there's a presence of mental illness. So, as you can see from this image, the continuum of mental illness is the horizontal line, and that's actually completely separate from the state of our mental well being. So you can see on one end of that horizontal line, there is the presence of serious mental illness, and on the other end of that horizontal line, there are no mental illness symptoms. So this means that the presence of mental illness is completely separate from that vertical line where you can see at the top we have optimal mental health where we're flourishing, and at the bottom we have poor mental health where we're languishing. So languishing isn't the same as mental illness. Languishing is where we're struggling and we might not meet the diagnosable criteria for a mental illness. So this could be potentially how you were feeling during COVID, where you might not have gotten diagnosed with a mental illness, but you maybe weren't doing so great. And you can see here with these two continuums, it creates four quadrants. So you can have the presence of a mental illness and really great mental health, which would look like a person who is getting treatment, has a really great support network, has really great coping skills. And that would be in the opposite quadrant to a person who maybe doesn't have mental health symptoms or symptoms of a mental illness, but is languishing. So that just gives you a good sense of how relevant flourishing is to everyone, regardless of whether or not you have a mental illness. And this is really relevant for the workplace because, yes, at work, in creating a mentally healthy workplace environment, we want to be addressing mental illness and supporting individuals who are experiencing a mental illness and looking at ways we can adjust the workplace environment to cope with this. But overall, we can also be focusing on creating a workplace environment that enables everyone to flourish. So let's talk a little bit more about what flourishing looks like and how we can attain that state of flourishing and continually work towards it. So, PERMA is the acronym used in positive psychology, developed by the founder of positive psychology, Martin Seligman. And it stands for positive emotions, which is the right balance of heartfelt positivity to boost our resilience, engagement, the regular development of our strengths. So, how engaged we are in our lives and our work depends on whether or not we're developing and using our strengths. Our relationships, so how authentic and energized we are by connecting with others. Meaning, a sense of connection to something bigger than ourselves. Accomplishment, the belief and ability to do things that matter most to us. And then there is the addition of the letter H, which stands for health, because that's a component of overall mental well being as well. So, this comes from the Wellbeing Lab, and it gives you a very rudimentary way to assess how you're doing in each one of these well-being pillars. So, you can assess for yourself whether you have the presence of positive emotions, engagement, relationships, meaning, accomplishment, and health. You can also assess the presence of these well-being pillars on your team. So as you look through this, you can see the presence of positive of emotions is if your team willingly and quickly talked about problems and tough issues with each other, even if it felt uncomfortable. If your team is engaged, it means you found ways to utilize each other's strengths as you work together, and so on. Now, this basic assessment, just gives you a good sense of how you're doing in each one of these well-being pillars and gives you a sense of where you might want to focus in further. So let's talk about what each one looks like. Positive emotions. So, when we have a positive mood and a positive mindset, we're more engaged, we're more creative, motivated, productive, and much better at collaborating and building good relationships. And there is such a thing known as the broaden and build theory, which is an upward spiral of learning, growth, connection, and resilience. And this is what happens when we have positive emotions, because positive emotions expand what we see, make us feel safe so we can think more about us as a group and a team rather than ourselves as individuals. We can think faster and more creatively, and this creates a continual upward spiral of more and more good things. Another note on positive emotions is that we have to be intentional in cultivating them every day because humans are predisposed to negative thinking. So the negativity bias is something that we all have, and it developed as a result of our need for safety, where our minds pay closer attention to negative things that are happening so that we can solve for risks and threats to our survival. But now that we don't necessarily need such a focus on those things, that negativity bias isn't so helpful, but it's still hanging around. So instead of just relying on positive emotions to appear as they come, they're not necessarily going to as much as negative emotions. So we have to be really intentional about boosting our positive emotions. Negative emotions, you can think of them like a telephone that signal our attention. So when we feel something negative, that's a clue to you to tune into that emotion. What is it saying? And we are notoriously bad at paying attention to negative emotions. In our culture, typically we just sweep them under the rug. They're uncomfortable. We want to ignore them, move past them, but they have important messages for us. So the goal here is to really acknowledge them and find out what the message is. Another note about positive emotions when it comes to stress, the way that stress impacts us really depends on our beliefs about stress. So, if we believe stress is bad for us and that it's going to do harmful things, it's more likely to do harmful things. Versus if we see stress as an instigator for problem solving, we are less likely to experience the negative physiological impacts of stress. And this has been proven through studies. You can Google Dr. Aaliyah Crum and read all about her results in this area. At work, one way to engage and boost positive emotions is to trade favors or make it a habit to ask in meetings what's working well. These are two really easy tips and tricks to help boost positive emotions. The next element of the PERMA framework to well-being is engagement, where we're focused on developing our strengths. Strengths are our neurological superpowers. So traditionally, we have taken an approach to performance where we want to be very well rounded. And that we're finding is less helpful than focusing, honing in on leveraging our strengths because our strengths are our superpowers. They come very naturally to us. They are things that we are really good at that involve less effort and more ease. We're more confident, less stressed, more energetic, happier, creative, engaged, and satisfied at work when we use our strengths. Some cues you might experience when it's time to really dial up a strength is when you find yourself procrastinating, putting things off, when you lack the confidence to dive into a task or a necessary conversation. That is an opportunity to bring to mind a strength and identify ways that you could approach this task that would really leverage your strength. Signals you're overplaying a strength could be when you're giving something your all, but mistakes keep happening. Other people aren't that appreciative of your hard work, or you're on the verge of burning out. So, oftentimes, something we might label as a weakness is really just overplaying a strength. So, that's a clue to you to really consider how can you be more intentional about the ways you apply your strengths at work. So, one tip that you can use in the workplace is to have everyone on the team complete a strength survey and discuss their results together. There is a free tool that I can link to for you that you could utilize with your teams. And at Make It Work, we also offer workshops on team building and that strengths based approach. The next pillar of workplace well building is relationships. And this is where we focus on creating connections. And this is so important to our well being because human survival depended on fitting in with each other and feeling that sense of belonging. And wanting to belong shapes a lot of our behavior. So, creating this sense of belonging in the workplace is really important. Oxytocin is that feel good hormone that we get from connecting with others, and it can really reduce anxiety and improve concentration and focus. Studies show that having a sense of belonging at work, like when we have a best friend at work, means we're 7 times more likely to be engaged in our jobs, produce higher quality work, and have higher levels of well-being and be less likely to be injured. So it's in your best interest to really nurture those connections in the workplace and encourage that team building and friendly connection approach. Another element that we need to pay attention to when it comes to relationships in the workplace is around giving. So, the ideal way to give in the workplace that maximizes benefits but protects our givers is to encourage self protective giving. So, this is when, yes, we are giving, but we also are giving with boundaries because as we all know, there are those natural helpers in the workplace, and we tend to rely on them quite a bit. They're usually pretty bad at saying no to things. So we really need to support those individuals in setting boundaries around that. At work, one really easy tip to foster connections is to focus more on having kind conversations and being curious in the way that you connect with other people. And this relies on everybody to participate. So we can all do our part to really foster more of these kinds of connections and relationships. Meaning is the next piece of the well-being puzzle, and it really is all about having that sense of meaning in the work that we do because that we are finding is more important than promotions, income, job security, flexible hours. People want to feel a sense of meaning at work. The strongest predictor of meaningfulness is the belief that it has a positive impact on other people. So, really thinking about how is what I'm doing having an impact. Companies with a higher purpose make more money. We need to pay attention, however, though, to what's called obsessive passion. And this is where we dive too much into the work that we're doing and it compromises our sense of balance. So we need to pay attention to not getting not having work be our only sense of meaning in life. At work, one way to boost that sense of meaning is to make a point of discussing and writing down as a team all the ways you make a positive difference for others and discuss how it relates to each of your roles. So, helping everybody identify how it is their work impacts the world around you. Okay, accomplishment in the PERMA acronym is all about building grit. Now, grit is the passion and perseverance that it takes to pursue long term goals. But the thing about grit is that it often comes with a very fixed mindset. So we think that those who can persevere and push through and overcome all obstacles just have something the rest of us don't. And in fact, that is not so true. We can really, if we're wanting to build our grit, can focus on building our growth mindset. So, a growth mindset is the belief that we can learn and we can improve. And we're comfortable with learning and a focus on efforts and processes rather than a focus solely on outcomes. In order to build this growth mindset, we need to be okay with failure. We need to build our self compassion so that we're comfortable with failing, so that we can soothe ourselves when we experience failure and then learn. So, building grit is going to be easier with a focus on helping others and by nurturing emotions like gratitude, compassion, and authentic pride. At work, one tip for building that sense of accomplishment and grit is to regularly share what we've learned from failures. So, being really open and accepting of failures and promoting conversations that help us learn from those. This clarifies growth versus fixed mindset. So you can take a look, pause here, and decide for yourself where you feel like you're at on the continuum of growth versus fixed mindset. And keep in mind that we might be at different points on this continuum, depending on the situation and depending on the day. But the goal is to always be shifting more towards that growth mindset. As you can see, even by these statements, it's going to be the most helpful in life. The last letter of the PERMA Framework of Wellbeing is H for health. And here the goal is to really maximize our energy. And this doesn't mean we're going to be going all the time, but it really does just bring our mind to focus on how can we nurture more balanced energy? How can we pay closer attention to what we're eating to make sure that we're nurturing our energy, required energy? How can we pay more attention to sleep and healthy sleep hygiene? And how can we incorporate more healthy movement and the kind of movement our body needs if the kind of movement we need isn't high energy? Maybe it's rest and refueling. So, this is something we can make small but impactful choices at every day. And at work, one way that you can really promote health is to implement things like walking meetings, taking lunch breaks. So, role modeling that if you're a leader in the workplace and sharing healthy meal options. So, bringing it back to the entire framework for well being, this is each one of your pillars with a description underneath. And the goal here is to really think about how interested, confident, or motivated you are in acting on your well being for yourself in your own life, but also for your workplace. Because we, even if you aren't a leader, can all be change agents in our workplace. Really important that we all bring that motivation to the workplace to help that create that upward spiral. So if you're not feeling very interested, confident, or motivated, then Considering what your barriers or blocks are could be helpful. Why is it that you aren't feeling this way in your workplace, and what can be done about that? Then having a think about how your work team can support you in achieving your individual goals, and then vice versa. How can you support your team in achieving their goals? So, making a point of chatting about this as a team. And then, lastly, another question for reflection would be, what goals would you like to see the team take on based on what you know of PERMA? So, based on what you've learned about positive psychology and the framework for well being, how do you think your team could tackle well being? So I hope these questions have given you some food for thought and that you've learned a little bit about positive psychology in the workplace. And you can get in touch with me at my email address or on my website. I have further resources available for you. You can book a lunch and learn style presentation or a half day workshop of this topic to dive into it in more detail, where we can use the PERMA survey and all kinds of other really great resources and tools to get your team feeling really confident about tackling and boosting well being in the workplace. Thanks so much for joining.